Sometimes the wrong kiss is the only way out, until it becomes the only truth you can't escape. The rain had just started when Clara Hayes stepped into the marble hallway, her shoes still damp, her breath quiet like she didn't belong in a place this polished, this expensive, this silent. She kept her eyes low, fingers wrapped around the tray she carried, trying to memorize the rules she had been given just hours ago. Don't speak unless spoken to, don't look too long, don't exist more than necessary. But the night was already breaking those rules for her. Inside the grand dining room, voices were sharp, controlled, the kind of polite tension that hid something colder underneath. And at the center of it stood Adrian Blake, the man everyone watched but no one truly reached. Tall, composed, his suit perfect, his expression even more so, like nothing could touch him, like he had already decided how the night would end. Clara didn't mean to step forward at the wrong time. Didn't mean for her hand to tremble when someone called her name too suddenly. Didn't mean for the glass to tilt. Just enough for dark red wine to spill across Adrian's white shirt, the stain blooming like a mistake that couldn't be undone. The room froze. Conversations cut mid-breath, and Clara felt it instantly. That shift, that weight, that silent judgment pressing down on her. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely there, already stepping back as if she could disappear. But Adrian didn't move, didn't react the way anyone expected. He just looked at her, really looked, for a second longer than appropriate, like he was seeing something beyond the accident, something quieter. Across the room, a woman's voice broke the stillness, smooth but firm, reminding him of the announcement he was supposed to make tonight, the engagement everyone had already agreed on without asking him. Clara didn't understand the details, only the tension tightening the air. Only the way Adrian's jaw shifted almost invisibly, like he was standing at the edge of something he refused to step into. She lowered her head again, ready to be dismissed, ready to be replaced, ready to leave before she caused more damage. But then his hand moved. It was quick, decisive, unexpected, his fingers closing gently but firmly around her wrist, stopping her from stepping away. Her breath caught, her heart stumbled, and before she could process it, he pulled her closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, the steady rhythm he kept hidden from everyone else. The room watched, silent, waiting, and then he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, wasn't careless, but it wasn't intimate either. It was something in between, something controlled yet undeniable, a statement more than a moment, a choice made in front of witnesses who suddenly didn't know what they were seeing. Clara froze, her mind blank, her body still, the world narrowing to that single point of contact she hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. When he pulled back, just enough, his voice was calm, low, carrying across the room without force. "I believe that answers your question." And just like that, everything changed, because in a house where every move was calculated, every word rehearsed, Adrian Blake had just rewritten the night with one impossible decision, and Clara Hayes, the girl who wasn't supposed to be seen, had just become the center of a story she never meant to enter. The silence did not break right away. It stretched, thin and fragile, like everyone in the room was waiting for someone to correct what had just happened, but no one did. And that made it real in a way Clara could not undo. She stepped back instinctively, her fingers still tingling, her breath uneven as she lowered her eyes again, wishing the polished floor would open and take her out of the moment. But the weight of every gaze stayed on her, heavy and sharp. Whispers began, quiet at first, then spreading like something alive, and she caught fragments she was not meant to hear. Words like calculated, convenient, scandal, and none of them sounded like kindness. Clara turned slightly, ready to leave, to escape before things became worse. But Adrian's voice stopped her again, calm and steady. "Stay." And it was not loud, not forceful, yet it carried enough authority that she could not ignore it. She hesitated, her hands tightening at her sides, then slowly nodded, because in this house, his word felt like gravity. The dinner resumed, but nothing felt the same. Conversations were thinner now, smiles more careful, and every now and then someone would glance at her, measuring, questioning, deciding who she was allowed to be. Clara kept her movements small, precise, focusing on the simple tasks she understood, pouring water, clearing plates, keeping her distance even while standing closer than she ever should have been. across the table. Adrian remained composed, as if nothing had shifted, as if the moment had not existed. But once, just once, when no one else was looking, his eyes met hers, and there was something there she could not name, something quiet and unreadable, like a thought he was not ready to say. When the dinner finally ended, the guests drifted away in controlled clusters, their whispers following them out, and Clara moved quickly toward the service hallway, her heart still unsettled, her thoughts racing in a way that made no sense. She barely made it past the corner before she heard his footsteps behind her, measured, unhurried, and she stopped because she knew he expected her to. "You should not have done that," she said softly, her voice careful, not accusing, just honest, because it was the only thing she had. There was a pause before he answered, long enough for her to feel it. "I did what I had to do," and his tone was even, but not empty. She turned slightly, still not fully facing him. "And now what happens to me?" she asked, because that part mattered more than anything else. Another pause, quieter this time, and when he spoke again, his voice dropped just enough to feel different. "Nothing happens to you if you stay," he said, and the words hung there. Simple, but not simple at all. Clara frowned slightly, confusion slipping through her calm. "Stay as what?" she asked, and this time, when she finally looked at him, he did not look away. His expression did not change, but something beneath it shifted, something that felt less controlled, more uncertain, and for the first time that night, Adrian Blake did not have a perfect answer. "I do not know yet," he admitted, and it was quiet, almost lost in the space between them. But it was real in a way everything else had not been, and Clara felt it, that small crack in the man everyone thought was unbreakable, and somehow, that scared her more than the kiss ever did. The hallway felt colder after he said it, like the air itself had shifted into something Clara could not fully understand, and for a moment she just stood there, searching his face for a clearer answer, something solid she could hold on to. But Adrian Blake did not offer more. He only watched her with that same controlled stillness, as if he was deciding something in real time. Clara looked down, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the tray she still held, grounding herself in something simple, something real. "I am not part of your world," she said quietly, not as a protest, but as a truth she had lived her whole life. And for a second, something flickered in his eyes, something that almost looked like agreement. But he shook his head slightly. "You are now," he replied, and the certainty in his voice made it harder to breathe. She swallowed, her thoughts tangling. "For how long?" she asked, because staying without knowing felt like stepping into something without an end. Adrian exhaled slowly, not impatient, not dismissive, just measured. "Until it is over," he said, echoing something unfinished, something undefined, and then he reached into his pocket, pulling out a neatly folded handkerchief, the same one she had seen him use earlier before the dinner began. Clean, precise, untouched by the chaos of the night until now. He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that she could feel the quiet presence of him again, and gently held it out to her. "You should not walk around with that stain on your hands," he added, his tone softer, almost absent of the sharp edges people expected from him. Clara hesitated before taking it, her fingers brushing against his for the briefest second, a small contact that somehow felt louder than the entire room earlier, and she nodded faintly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely steady. The fabric was smooth, expensive, something she would never own, and she used it carefully, as if it carried more weight than just a simple gesture. Silence settled between them again, but this time it was different, less tense, more uncertain, like both of them were standing at the edge of something neither had planned. "There will be questions tomorrow," Adrian said after a moment, his gaze shifting slightly toward the distant glow of the main hall, where voices still lingered faintly. "Press, board members, my family," he continued, each word grounded in reality, each consequence already unfolding. Clara felt it then, the full weight of what had happened, not just a moment, not just a mistake, but something that would follow her beyond this night, into places she had never imagined stepping into. "I do not know how to answer them," she admitted, honest again because it was the only way she knew how to be. Adrian looked back at her, his expression unreadable but his voice steady. "You do not have to," he said. You just have to stay. And the way he said it made it sound simple. Even though nothing about it was. Clara tightened her grip on the handkerchief, feeling its softness, its quiet presence, something small anchoring her in a moment that felt too large, and she nodded slowly, not because she understood everything, but because leaving felt impossible now, like the world had already shifted around her. Adrian watched her for another second, as if confirming her decision without needing her to say it out loud. Then he stepped back, the distance returning between them, controlled, deliberate, but not the same as before. Someone will move your things upstairs, he added, already turning slightly as if the decision had been made long before she realized it. It will be easier that way. And Clara felt her breath catch again, because upstairs meant closer, meant deeper inside his world, meant there was no easy way back. She looked down at the handkerchief in her hands, at the small, almost invisible detail stitched into the corner, something personal, something his, and for reasons she could not explain, she folded it carefully instead of giving it back, holding on to it like it might be the only thing keeping her steady as everything else began to change. The next morning did not feel like a new day. It felt like a continuation of something that had already gone too far, and Clara woke up before the sun fully rose, sitting on the edge of a bed that was too soft, in a room that was too quiet, holding the folded handkerchief in her hands like it was the only familiar thing she had left. The windows stretched wide across the wall, letting in a pale gray light that made everything look distant, unreal, and for a moment she forgot where she was, until the silence reminded her that this was not her world, not her life, not something she could understand yet. She stood slowly, her bare feet touching the cool floor, and walked toward the glass, watching the city below begin to wake, cars moving like quiet lines, people too small to see clearly, and she wondered if anyone down there knew how quickly a life could change overnight. A soft knock came at the door, gentle but precise, and she turned, her fingers instinctively tightening around the handkerchief before she set it carefully on the nightstand. When she opened the door, a staff member greeted her politely, informing her that Mr. Blake had requested her presence for breakfast, and the way they said it, calm and respectful, made it clear that something about her place here had already shifted. Clara nodded, following the instructions without asking questions, moving through hallways that felt longer than they should, lined with quiet luxury, everything clean, controlled, untouched. When she reached the dining area upstairs, Adrian was already there, seated at the far end of a long table, a cup of coffee in his hand, his posture relaxed but distant, like he had been awake for hours, like sleep did not come easily to him. He glanced up as she entered, his eyes steady, observing, not surprised to see her, and he gestured lightly toward the chair across from him. "Sit," he said, simple, direct, and Clara hesitated for a second before obeying, lowering herself carefully into the seat, aware of the space between them, aware of everything that had changed but not knowing how to act within it. The table was set with more food than she could ever eat, but she did not reach for anything, her hands resting in her lap as she waited, unsure if she was allowed to begin. Adrian noticed, of course he did, and after a brief pause, he spoke again. "You need to eat." His tone neutral, not unkind, just certain, and she nodded slightly, reaching for a small piece of toast, her movements careful, controlled. Silence settled between them again, but it was not empty. It carried something unspoken, something that lingered just beneath the surface, and Clara felt it in the way he occasionally looked at her, not long enough to be obvious, but long enough to be felt. "The news is already out," Adrian said after a moment, setting his cup down with quiet precision. "It will get worse before it gets better," and Clara swallowed, her appetite fading as reality pressed in again. "What should I do?" she asked softly, because she needed something clear, something she could follow. Adrian leaned back slightly, studying her in that same unreadable way, and for a second it felt like he was deciding how much to tell her, how much to let her see. "Stay close," he said finally. "Do not speak unless I tell you to, and do not let anyone make you feel like you do not belong here." And the last part was different, quieter, almost personal, and Clara blinked, surprised by it. She lowered her gaze again, nodding slowly, but something inside her shifted, just a little, because no one had ever said that to her before. The room fell silent once more, the sound of distant city, life barely reaching them through the glass. And for a moment, everything felt still, like time had paused between two people who were not supposed to be here together. Clara reached for her cup, her fingers brushing the edge, steadying herself, and across the table, Adrian watched her again, not with distance this time, but with something softer, something quieter, like he was beginning to notice the details he had not planned to see. And without saying it out loud, the space between them felt smaller than it had the night before. By the afternoon, the house no longer felt quiet. It felt watched, every hallway carrying a sense of awareness Clara could not escape, as if the walls themselves knew what had happened and were waiting to see what she would do next. Staff members moved differently around her now, still polite, still professional. But there was hesitation in their eyes, curiosity they tried to hide, and Clara kept her gaze low, focusing on her tasks, on small routines that reminded her who she was before all of this. She folded linens with careful precision, arranged flowers that did not need arranging, anything to stay grounded. But even then, she could feel it, the shift. The way her presence now meant something she did not ask for. Later, she was called upstairs again, this time not for a meal, but because Adrian had a meeting and she was expected to be there, not as staff, but as something else she still did not understand. When she entered his office, the space felt colder than the rest of the house. Wide glass windows stretching from floor to ceiling. The city spread out beyond them like something distant and unreachable, and Adrian stood near the desk, reviewing documents, his focus sharp, controlled, like the man from the night before had folded himself back into place. He did not look up immediately when she stepped in, and for a moment she thought she should leave, but then he spoke, closed the door, and she did, quietly, the soft click echoing more than it should. "Stand here," he added, gesturing beside him. Not too close, but not far either, and Clara obeyed, her hands resting gently together, her posture still, trying to make herself smaller in a space that did not allow it. Voices soon filled the room as a video call connected, faces appearing on the large screen, men and women in formal attire, their expressions measured but clearly curious, and Clara felt their attention shift to her almost immediately, subtle but unmistakable. Adrian spoke first, calm, confident, introducing her without explanation, without apology, as if her presence needed none, and Clara felt her breath tighten, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen in a way she had never been before. The conversation moved quickly, numbers, decisions, strategies, words that passed through her without meaning, but she watched Adrian instead, the way he spoke, the way he held control without raising his voice, the way everyone listened even when they disagreed. And for the first time, she understood the distance between his world and hers not as something visible, but something deeply built into who he was. At one point, someone on the screen asked directly, their tone polite but pointed, about the situation from the night before, about her, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Clara felt it, that moment where she did not belong, where she could be dismissed with a sentence, erased with a decision, and instinctively, her fingers tightened slightly against each other. Adrian did not hesitate, did not deflect, he simply said, "She stays." His voice even, final, leaving no room for argument, and something in that answer settled the room in a way nothing else could. The call moved on, but Clara could not ignore what had just happened, not the words, not the certainty behind them. And when the meeting finally ended, the screen went dark. The office returning to silence, she exhaled slowly, not realizing she had been holding her breath. "You did not have to do that," she said softly, turning slightly toward him, because she did not understand why he would choose that level of finality for someone like her. Adrian closed the file in front of him, his movements precise, controlled, then looked at her, really looked again, and for a moment, there was something unguarded in his expression, something that did not match the man from the meeting. "Yes, I did," he replied quietly, and this time, there was no distance in his voice, no calculation, just something simple and real that lingered in the space between them, making Clara realize that whatever this was, it was no longer just about escaping something, it was becoming something neither of them had planned. That night, the house felt different again, quieter than before, but not empty. as if something invisible had settled into the spaces between walls and windows, something neither of them had named yet. Clara could not sleep, the bed still unfamiliar, the silence too wide. And after staring at the ceiling for what felt like hours, she slipped out of the room, her steps light against the polished floor, following the faint glow of a lamp down the hallway. She did not expect to find him there, sitting alone in the living area near the glass wall, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond him, his tie loosened, his posture slightly less controlled than during the day, as if the night allowed something in him to loosen, just a little. She hesitated at the edge of the room, unsure if she should leave, but before she could turn, his voice reached her, low and steady. "You should be asleep," and she stopped, her fingers lightly brushing the edge of the wall beside her, grounding herself. "I could not," she answered honestly, stepping a little closer but still keeping distance. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the quiet between them filled only by the distant hum of the city below. Adrian glanced toward her, his eyes softer than she had seen before, not guarded in the same way, and he gestured faintly toward the chair across from him, not commanding this time, just offering, and Clara moved slowly, sitting down, her hands resting gently in her lap, aware of every small movement, every breath. The light was dim, warm, casting soft shadows across the room, and for the first time since she arrived, the space did not feel overwhelming, just quiet, just real. "Does it always feel like this?" she asked after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "This empty." And the word lingered, careful, not accusing, just searching. Adrian did not answer right away, his gaze shifting back toward the window, the reflection of the city lights flickering faintly in his eyes. And when he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she expected. "Yes," he said, simple, without defense, and that honesty made something in Clara soften. She looked down at her hands, then slowly reached into the pocket of her dress, pulling out the folded handkerchief he had given her, still clean, still carefully kept, and without thinking too much, she leaned forward slightly and placed it on the table between them. "You should have it back," she said, her tone gentle, but Adrian did not reach for it, not immediately. Instead, he looked at the small piece of fabric, then back at her, something unreadable passing through his expression before he finally spoke. "Keep it." And Clara blinked, surprised. "It is yours," she said, but he shook his head slightly. "Not anymore." And the way he said it made it feel like more than just an object, like he was letting go of something he had kept controlled for too long. Silence returned, but this time it felt closer, warmer, like the distance between them had shifted without either of them noticing. A sudden flicker interrupted the moment, the lights dimming briefly before going out completely, leaving the room in darkness except for the faint glow from the city outside. And Clara's breath caught softly, not in fear, just surprise. For a second, everything was still, the world reduced to shadows and outlines. And then Adrian stood, moving closer, not rushed, not abrupt, just steady, until he was near enough that she could sense him without seeing clearly. "It happens sometimes," he said quietly, his voice closer now, softer in the dark, and Clara nodded even though he might not see it. The air between them felt different in the darkness, less defined, less controlled, and when she turned slightly, her movement brought her closer than she intended, her breath brushing lightly against the space between them. Neither of them stepped back. For a moment, time seemed to pause again, like it had that night. But this time there was no audience, no pressure, no reason, just a quiet pull neither of them named. And then, gently, almost carefully, Adrian lifted his hand, his fingers brushing lightly against her cheek, a touch so soft it felt like a question more than an action, and Clara did not move away. The space between them closed slowly, naturally, and when he kissed her this time, it was not to prove anything, not to escape anything. It was quiet, real, and impossible to misunderstand, and in that moment, Clara realized this was no longer something she could pretend not to feel. Morning came too quickly, and the softness of the night felt like something that did not belong to daylight, as if what had happened between them existed only in shadows and silence, not in the world that waited outside those walls. Clara stood by the window in her room, watching the city move again, steady and indifferent, her fingers lightly holding the handkerchief, unfolding and folding it again without realizing. Her thoughts tangled in something she could not name, but could not ignore. A quiet knock came at the door, more formal than before, and when she opened it, she was met not with the calm routine of the house, but with a message that changed everything again. Mr. Blake was requested downstairs immediately, and she was to come as well. The tone was different, controlled but urgent, and Clara felt it before she understood it. When they entered the main hall, the atmosphere was heavier, sharper, the kind of tension that did not need words to be felt, and standing near the center was a woman Clara had never seen before, poised, elegant, her presence commanding in a way that did not need volume. Her eyes fixed on Adrian with a familiarity that made Clara instinctively step back. "You made quite a statement last night," the woman said, her voice smooth but edged with something colder, something deliberate, and Adrian stopped a few feet away, his posture returning instantly to that composed distance Clara had seen before, like the night had never happened. "It was necessary," he replied, his tone even, unreadable, and Clara felt something tighten in her chest, not because of the words, but because of the way he said them, like everything could still be reduced to strategy. The woman's gaze shifted to Clara then, slow, assessing, and for the first time since this began, Clara felt truly out of place, not just unsure, but unwelcome. "This is your solution," the woman continued, her eyes not leaving Clara. "A distraction," and the word landed heavier than it should have. Clara lowered her gaze, her fingers tightening around the fabric in her hand, but she did not speak, because she remembered what he told her. "Stay, do not speak, do not let them decide who you are." Adrian stepped slightly forward, just enough to shift the space between them. "That is enough," he said, not raised, but firm, and the room seemed to still around that boundary. The woman held his gaze for a moment longer, then exhaled softly, almost amused. "You always choose the difficult path," she said, her tone softening in a way that made it more dangerous. "But this will cost you." And Clara felt those words settle into the room like something inevitable. Adrian did not respond right away, and that silence stretched, long enough for Clara to notice it, long enough for something to feel wrong. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more controlled than before. "I will handle it," he said, and the words sounded like a promise, but not to her. The woman nodded slightly, satisfied or simply finished, then turned and walked away, her presence leaving a lingering weight behind. The room remained still for a moment, and Clara waited, not looking up, not moving, because she did not know what she was supposed to be now. "Go upstairs," Adrian said finally, his voice calm again, distant again, and Clara looked up, just briefly, searching his face for something from the night before, something that would tell her it had not been imagined, but she did not find it. She nodded quietly, turning without another word, her steps steady even as something inside her shifted, something fragile beginning to crack. As she walked away, the handkerchief in her hand felt different, heavier, not just a small anchor anymore, but a reminder of a moment that now felt too far away, and for the first time since she arrived, Clara wondered if staying was no longer something she could hold on to, because whatever this was becoming, it was no longer just between the two of them, and she was not sure she would be the one he chose when everything finally broke. Clara did not go back to the window this time. She stayed near the bed, the room suddenly feeling smaller than it had before, like the walls had moved closer without warning, and the silence no longer felt calm. It felt heavy, pressing down on every thought she tried not to face. She sat slowly, the handkerchief still in her hands, smoothing its edges over and over as if it could steady something inside her that had begun to slip. The words from downstairs stayed with her, not loud, not repeated, just there, lingering in a quiet way that made them harder to ignore. "A distraction. This will cost you." And she realized she had stepped into something that was never meant to last, something that belonged to a world where decisions were made without asking what she wanted. Hours passed without her noticing, the light in the room shifting from pale morning to a softer afternoon glow, but she did not move much, only thinking, remembering small moments she had tried not to hold on to, the way he looked at her when no one else was watching, the way his voice softened when the room was quiet, the way that second kiss felt different from anything she had ever known. Not loud, not rushed, just real. And that was the problem. It felt real to her, even if it was never meant to be. A gentle knock came at the door again, quieter this time, and when Clara opened it, one of the staff members stood there with a small, polite smile, holding a folded note. "This was left for you," they said softly before stepping away, leaving Clara alone again with something she was not sure she wanted to read. She closed the door slowly, her fingers hesitating for a moment before unfolding the paper, her eyes moving carefully over the words written in a clean, controlled hand. "It will be easier if you return downstairs by evening. Things need to be corrected." There was no name, no explanation, but she did not need one. She understood what it meant, what it was asking her to do, to step back, to disappear into the role she had before, to undo what should never have begun. Clara stood there for a long moment, the note trembling slightly in her hand, and for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to feel it fully. The quiet ache of something ending before it had a chance to become anything more. She walked to the nightstand, placing the note beside the handkerchief, looking at both as if they belonged to two different stories, one controlled, one real, and she knew she could not keep both. By the time the sun began to set, the decision had settled into her, not suddenly, not easily, but clearly. She changed into her original uniform, the simple fabric grounding her again, reminding her of where she came from, of who she was before everything shifted, and she folded the handkerchief one last time, placing it gently on the table instead of keeping it with her. When she stepped out of the room, her movements were calm, steady, not rushed, because leaving quietly felt like the only thing she could control now. The hallway stretched ahead of her, familiar again in a way it had not been before, and with each step, the distance between her and the life upstairs grew, returning her to something safer, something smaller, but also something she understood. Downstairs, the house carried on as if nothing had happened, voices low, movements precise, and Clara slipped back into place without drawing attention. Just another presence among many, just another part of the background. But even as she moved through her tasks, something remained, something she could not fully let go of, a quiet space inside her that still held the memory of a night that felt too real to forget, and somewhere above, in a room she no longer belonged to, she knew Adrian Blake was still there, surrounded by everything he had chosen to keep, while she had chosen to walk away before she became something he would have to lose. The house felt quieter than it ever had, not because there were fewer people, but because something had been removed from it, something that could not be replaced by routine or control, and Adrian felt it the moment he stepped back into his room that night. The space was exactly the same, every object in place, every surface untouched, but the stillness no longer felt familiar. It felt empty in a way he could not ignore. His eyes moved instinctively toward the small table near the window, and that was when he saw it, the folded handkerchief, placed carefully, deliberately, not forgotten, not lost, but returned. He walked toward it slowly, his steps quieter than usual, as if the room demanded it. And when he picked it up, the fabric felt different in his hand, not because it had changed, but because he had. For a moment, he just stood there, holding it, the memory of that night settling in without resistance. The silence, the darkness, the way she did not pull away, the way everything felt real without needing to be explained. He exhaled slowly, something in his chest tightening, not sharp, not sudden, just steady, like a truth he had delayed too long. Downstairs, the house continued its rhythm, but he knew where she would be, back where she believed she belonged, back where he had allowed her to return without stopping her. And that realization settled heavier than anything his family had said, heavier than any decision he had made before. He closed his hand around the handkerchief, then turned without hesitation, leaving the room, moving through the hallway with a purpose that had nothing to do with business, nothing to do with control, and everything to do with something he could no longer ignore. When he reached the lower level, he did not slow down, his gaze scanning the space until he found her, near the far end, arranging something small, something unimportant, like she had never left that place at all. For a second, he stopped, watching her, the distance between them clearer than ever, not just in space, but in everything that had kept them apart, everything he had used as a reason not to choose differently. Then he walked toward her, closing that distance step by step until she noticed him, her hands pausing, her posture stilling as she looked up, surprised, uncertain, but calm in the way she always was. "You left," he said, his voice quieter than usual, not accusing, just stating what he had not stopped, and Clara lowered her gaze briefly before answering. "It was easier," she replied softly, the same words he had used before, but now they sounded different, like something that carried weight instead of avoidance. Adrian shook his head slightly, a small movement, but enough to break the pattern he had been holding on to. "No," he said, and this time his voice did not carry distance, did not carry control. It carried something real, something unguarded. It was not. And Clara looked at him again, really looked, searching for something she was not sure she should believe. He stepped closer, not too close, but enough that the space between them no longer felt like a barrier, and he held out the handkerchief, not as something to return, but as something to offer back. "I thought I needed control," he continued, his voice steady but softer than she had ever heard it. "I thought I could decide what stays and what goes." And he paused, just for a second, as if choosing his next words mattered more than anything else. "But I was wrong." The room around them faded into quiet, not empty, but still, as if everything else understood this moment was not meant to be interrupted.